Welcome back to HQ. It's Tuesday. Time to get to the waiver wire walkthrough with the fellas from Fantasy Football Today. Dave Richard and Jamey Eisenberg here to help some of us who might be 0-2 in their league. So we'll go through position groups, get you ready for additions, and then you got to make room. So we'll talk about players to drop. Let's bring in the aforementioned Jamey Eisenberg and Dave Richard. I'm Tommy Tran. So we're going to start with Jamey's quarterback list. Who are we targeting here? There's been a lot of injuries, right? Purdy, Burrow, McCarthy. Am I missing anybody here? There's a lot to discuss here, Jamey. What do we think?
Brady, Manning. They're all out of the NFL at this point. It's been a rough week, obviously, and we're waiting to find out Jaden Daniels and Justin Fields and those. Two injuries in particular, but obviously no Joe Burrow, and it sounds like no J.J. McCarthy for a few weeks, and no Joe Burrow for the season. So Daniel Jones, it's time to give him credit, based on what he's done through the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, last year at this point, we were talking about, wow, Derek Carr looks great through the first 2 weeks of the season. So hopefully it's not a fooled you scenario when it comes to Daniel Jones. But I think just based on the setup, the fact that the Miami game I sort of pushed to the side. Okay, Dolphins stink. He was able to have a big game there. Team didn't punt. He scored on every possession. But then he does this against Denver, 24 fantasy points. He's got 3 rushing touchdowns on the season. So Daniel Jones is off to a great start. I know in the leagues where I'm losing Joe Burrow in one quarterback leagues, he's the guy I'm going to get. Jake Browning, in 7 starts in 2023, he averaged 22.2 fantasy points per game. He steps into that great situation. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, probably going to throw the ball a lot. So Browning's not a bad pivot play if you do lose Burrow. Aaron Rodgers, more about the schedule. Great week 1, bad week 2, but gets the Patriots in week 3. Like that setup for him. And then Carson Wentz, let's see if he gets that Kevin O'Connell magic. It worked for a quarter so far for J.J. McCarthy, but was great for Sam Darnold last year. Obviously been very good for Kirk Cousins. And so based on the setup there for Carson Wentz, a couple of games hopefully at the minimum here, but assuming the maximum there, where we see J.J. McCarthy back on the field, but Wentz is going to have an opportunity to make some plays.
2 quarterbacks to not forget about, and this is more long-term, not necessarily for week number 3, although I do like Michael Penix's matchup for week 3. He's going up against Carolina. And Sam Darnold, I thought he looked pretty good last week. He's got New Orleans this week. Maybe he can actually start to build on what he did last year. We forget about all that stuff that he did in the playoffs, and we just count on him as maybe a borderline, not even a borderline, like a middle-of-the-pack QB2 moving forward.
Okay, so that's a look at the quarterbacks. Dave, I go right back at you for the running backs here. What's the outlook this week?
First of all, this is not a great list. Thank goodness the running backs are mostly healthy across the league, because otherwise I think there would be some serious problems, and people might not even want to play fantasy football anymore. I've got Chris Rodriguez at the top of the list. We know that Austin Eckler is out for the year. Rodriguez is someone who isn't going to be the main guy for Washington. That's going to be Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And Jeremy McNichols is definitely going to be in on some passing downs, but Chris Rodriguez can catch the ball too. We've seen him run well in the past. He's going to get the opportunity to play. I would I would add him, stash him, and see what happens. The other 3 names on this list, kind of backups at this point. Rashad White is getting a decent amount of work. Of course, he scored against Houston on Monday night. That helped them out a lot. Just not available in a lot of leagues, but not somebody who's a bad idea for the bench. Same thing with Woody Marks, because we know he's backing up Nick Chubb. And Blake Corum, not getting a lot of work alongside Kyren Williams, but playing about a third of the snaps. And anytime Kyren Williams fumbles again, maybe Blake Corum gets a little bit more opportunity and sees more snaps for LA.
Sean McVay actually just said that he wants it to be a 65-35 split between Blake Corum and Kyren Williams. The other way around, Kyren Williams and Blake Corum.
That's basically what it was last week.
2 running backs. If you do not need anyone, the number 1 guy to go get and stash is Tyjae Spears, because he's 2 weeks away from coming back from that ankle injury. He's available everywhere, and if you have an IR spot, I don't know why you wouldn't be stashing him at this point, because there's still a lot of upside there, especially he gets back at the lighter part of the schedule for the Titans. And I would actually go McNichols over Rodriguez. I think we're going to see him play on passing downs. I think Rodriguez is more of the backup to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. I think McNichols is the Commanders running back you want to target first.
Okay, so you guys look a little more long-term, and I know there's a conversation about these rookie running backs, but that's a different discussion for a different podcast, maybe with you guys.
Maybe 2026.
And Adam. Yeah, well, hopefully not for those that have Genty, Hampton, and company. Those snap shares didn't look good this week. All right, Jamey, wide receivers here, especially obviously flex, 3 wide receiver leagues. What's the lowdown this week?
There's a lot of good guys. There's no real headliner at this point, but I think you look at what Wan'Dale Robinson was able to accomplish. And it's really more of a curiosity for me at this point, because you know what you're getting from Wan'Dale Robinson. First off, 18 targets through the first 2 weeks. We know that's kind of a constant. 140 targets last year, 93 receptions last year. Unfortunately, only 633 receiving yards. So you're going to get 11, 12 PPR points kind of out the door, as soon as he steps on the field. That's kind of what he's given. But we saw last week just a monster performance and the second game with Russell Wilson. So can we get a little bit more production and a little bit more opportunities for Wan'Dale Robinson to play a little bit more down the field? But once you get past him, there are a lot of guys that have plenty of upside, but a lot lot of question marks, certainly with what their quarterbacks will look like long term. And really in the same thing for Wanda Robinson, because Jackson Dart can take over at any point. But if Cedric Tillman loses Joe Flacco, how will you feel about the Browns offense? Rashid Shaheed, if we see a quarterback change at some point with Spencer Rattler going to Tyler Shuck. Troy Franklin looked awesome, and we know there's a connection for Bo Nix and Franklin from Oregon. And then you look at Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Doubs. Both these guys have an opportunity to step forward with Jaden Reed now out 6 to 8 weeks. I know what Romeo Doubs is. He's kind of a 10 to 12 PPR point per game guy at best when he doesn't score a touchdown. Dontavian Wicks may be a 14 to 15 point per game guy. He's going to be the one stepping into Jaden Reed's snap share. He's going to be the one stepping into sort of his pre-snap motion. He's going to be the guy I think that has the most upside. And this is somebody we were very excited about prior to last year. Now the runway is wide open. No Christian Watson, no Jaden Reed. Dontavian Wicks may be something special, so he's going to be the guy I target first.
A couple of other names at wide receiver, just long-term thinking. Torrey Horton did a nice job for Seattle in week number 2. He's available in a ton of leagues. Jalen Coker is available in over 90% of leagues. This is the big slot receiver in Carolina. They're going to need some more short area targets
job,
there.
Though.
To who? To Hunter Renfrow?
Hunter Renfrow.
I think he's coming right. I'm not afraid of Hunter
Coker,
Renfrow taking that job.
I mean, people were...
Two guys and one more guy. You know, you could stash Coker in an IR spot. You can also stash Christian Watson in an IR spot. Not that I'm like crazy about Christian Watson by any stretch of the imagination, but if it's a free stash, you might as well do it. See what happens when he comes back. He can end up being the best deep threat for the Packers for... It's Christian Watson about 4 weeks.
Okay.
If he gets hurt again.
Well, he could very well. That's usually the track record there. Tight end wise, the big conversation last week was George Kittle, names like Fannin, Juwan Johnson, etc. Have we learned anything with an extra week of information, Dave? Do you want to bail on any of them? Do you want to jump on anybody else right now?
Juwan Johnson is top 2 in PPR points per game among tight ends and targets per game among tight ends. This is the guy to go after off your waiver wire. Forget about the running back. Some of those wide receivers are good, but Juwan Johnson's becoming a must-start fantasy player in New Orleans. And we've seen the track record of Kellen Moore and how often he leans on his tight ends. This is in offenses in Dallas, Philly, the Chargers. It's been consistent, and we're seeing it now through the first 2 weeks. I am hoping that it stays this way. I like the matchup for him against Seattle in week number 3. I think Juwan Johnson is a guy who should be a priority for fantasy managers, and so should Harold Fannin if he's still out there in your leagues. But if those 2 guys are gone, like in all my leagues, those guys are gone already. Jatavian Sanders as a short-term fix at tight end. We saw him get a lot of targets last week against Arizona. There's still that 2-week window before we see Jalen Coker come back. We could see Jatavian Sanders be a decent option, more of a streamer than anything else at tight end.
Short term then, right? Jamey, any thoughts on the tight end position here?
I would love to get my hands on Isaiah Likely right now.
Okay.
Just in a lot of leagues at this point, because Mark Andrews has been a non-factor, and we heard all offseason before the broken foot, breakout season coming for Isaiah Likely from his coach, from that team. All-pro season coming for Isaiah Likely from his coach, from that team. And so they're not getting anything out of Andrews at this point. He just may be done. And so hopefully his injury will be behind him. He's ramping up his activity at this point. I would not be surprised if come Wednesday we get full practice and the people that ran waivers on Tuesday are like, oh my God, why did I not pick up Isaiah Likely? So get ahead of it if you can.
So we've got about a minute left to go. If you're going to make all these pickups, you got to also make some moves. You got to let go of some guys, Jamey. What are some potential targets there? Do you want to leave the roster?
So there's 2 easy ones. The first one would be Austin Eckler, just because of his injury situation. You're moving on from him. He's rostered in a lot of leagues. And the second one, which is a little tougher, is Joe Burrow. Because if you feel like you're going to be in fantasy playoffs, he's going to come back week 15. I think the thing about Joe Burrow is if you don't have an IR spot, you're moving on from him. If you have an IR spot and you can sort of manage it throughout the rest of the season, you stash him. But I'm looking at 2 tight ends that I'm getting rid of at this point, and that's Mark Andrews and Evan Ingram. 2 guys who were drafted to be starters. Extreme disappointments at this point. And again, Likely comes back. Andrews, I don't know who's going to want to start him. Ingram at this point is getting playing less snaps than Adam Troutman, which is really disappointing for the Broncos at this point. Now, I don't know how much of that was a calf injury, but clearly something that you got to keep an eye on there. Jaden Reed, if you don't have an IR spot, you're going to drop him 6 to 8 weeks. He's going to be out, so an easy guy to move on from there. And then you got to make some tough decisions to some of these wide receivers and tight ends that you picked up last week. So in particular, Hunter Henry, Brenton Strange, some guys that could be droppable as well. I'd like to see what they look like for another week, especially Brenton Strange, because there's something going on with Brian Thomas right now, and we saw a connection from Trevor Lawrence to Strange in the first game. We'll see if it carries over to this matchup. Tougher situation against Houston, but tight end's going to be a position I think we see a lot of influx.
Definitely a lot of churning there. J.J. McCarthy, you can move on from him for either Daniel Jones or Jake Browning. And you can use those guys as your number 2 QB rest of the season. Or you could be like me in our Dynasty League and use those guys as your number 1 QB because you had Joe Burrow.
Because you had Joe Burrow, 100% for Joe Cool. Oh my gosh, the calf, the toe, it's always something with him and the Bengals. And they got to a 2-0 start, which they haven't done the last.
Listen,
handful
Jake
of
Browning,
years.
4-3 in 2023. If they can manage it to the end of the season, they're still going to be
I
in the
think
hunt.
Right,
they
if they're
can.
6-5,
Right.
then they're going to be 8-5 when Burrow's healthy. They go 6-5 with Browning and then 8-5
We're
when
believers.
Burrow's back.
Pete Prisco,
Burrow
not a
could
believer.
be back.
Okay. All right, guys. Certainly appreciate it. Check
The
them out,
defense
by
will
the
carry
way.
him. Then no concern.
None at all. They just got to win all these shootouts, as we've seen. Guys, certainly appreciate it. Check out their show, of course, YouTube, podcast, and also Sundays at noon Eastern right here on CBS Sports HQ.